Hello and welcome to FP Live. I'm Ravi Agrawal, Foreign Policy's Editor-in-Chief. At the 100-day mark of Donald Trump's second term as president, several polls show that his approval ratings are historically low. Chaotic and scary are words that voters are using to describe these last 100 days, as well as the phrase gone too far. Gone too far on tariffs, on immigration, on cuts to the federal workforce. Because of that, according to one poll by ABC News and the Washington Post, Trump's approval rating is at 39%, the lowest ever for any past president at the 100-day mark. Now, voters usually think about the economy when they judge leaders. Today, we're going to focus on Trump's foreign policy. If this is your first time joining us on FP Live, welcome. We'll take some subscriber questions throughout, and certainly I always channel them in my line of questioning. If you would like to join in, use the code FP Live to become a subscriber. There's a good discount there. So, it is fair to say that world leaders are reeling from Trump's first 100 days in office. He has threatened to take over Gaza, Greenland, and the Panama Canal. Europeans are puzzled at why he seemed to favor Russia instead of Ukraine. Asians feel like they're being pressured to decouple from China. And allies such as Canada and Mexico have wondered why he's imposing stiff tariffs despite a free trade agreement that he approved in his first term. Is there a through line? Is there a grand strategy? One FP columnist has proposed 4 explanatory models for Trump's chaos, which includes ideas such as the return of realpolitik. That columnist is Emma Ashford, herself a top realist scholar. She's also a senior fellow at the Stimson Center, and she joins us now. Emma, welcome back to FP Live.
Thanks for having me.
So let's get right to it. 100 days in, what has stood out for you the most about the Trump administration's foreign policy as we know it?
Well, it has certainly been an active period. You used the word chaos. I think I hear that quite a lot. But what I would say even more than that is not that it's just been a chaotic foreign policy, but it has been incredibly active, right? We've had a whole running set of peace talks, many of them headed by the same guy, by Steve Witkoff, who appears to be Trump's new negotiator in Ukraine and Gaza, on Iran, potentially on North Korea. We've had the tariffs, and they've been sort of on off. No one really knows what's happening. We've had the domestic side of things with Doge, where it's impacting foreign policy bureaucracy, how the US conducts foreign policy around the world. And then there's been a whole series of either good or mostly contentious meetings and sort of interactions between the new administration and various US allies, the Europeans in particular, but we also had the vice president visiting India last week for what was a very friendly visit. So if nothing else, I think we can say that they are hitting the ground running on foreign policy.
What has surprised you about all of this, Emma? I think, there are many things we knew he was going to focus on. Illegal immigration, for example, tariffs, ending the war in Ukraine. We knew that these would be areas of interest for him in the beginning. What has surprised you?
I think, like for many people, even on the domestic side, I think the bureaucracy cutting Doge approach was perhaps one of the more surprising, right? Like many folks in DC, I woke up one day to discover that there's no longer a US Agency for International Development. And that was shocking and surprising. In any other administration, the administration would have proposed a plan to fold USAID into state. They would have gone on a messaging campaign highlighting its problems, and then they would have moved towards closing it. Instead, they just did it. And so I think the speed with which they've moved on some of these things, and in particular, their willingness to kind of cut away at the foundations of how the US actually conducts its foreign policy, that surprised me a lot.
Hmm. Many of our subscribers have been writing in. I'll name 2, William Tao, Altaf Hirani, and they want to know if it's possible to discern Trump's ultimate objective. What does he actually want? Are you able to get at any of that from these first 100 days?
I will say, I think the one constant through all of this is I genuinely think Donald Trump believes America first. It's not just a slogan for him. He is fundamentally a nationalist. And that's the through line that I see through pretty much everything he's doing. Now, the problem with that is that simply, looking for American interests in every area without, prioritizing in some places, without, thinking about how things trade off against one another. So, for an example, right, starting a fight with Europe over defense and also tariffs at the same time, those are going to work against each other. So I don't think this necessarily means he has a coherent approach, but I do think he's very consistent in always pushing for sort of the most that America can get from whatever he's doing.
Hmm. So you published a terrific piece in FP that explored four models that might explain what you call the White House's move fast and break things approach to foreign policy. And I want to go through them one by one. The first model was, as you put it, the return of realpolitik. Talk to us a little bit about that, and where do the Trump administration's actions fit that model, and where do they fall short?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess I should probably caveat or preface this one by saying that, I would probably be thrilled if this were accurate as a description of the Trump foreign policy. But this is an argument that we're seeing among quite a few segments of the Republican Party on the right. And there have been some comparisons, I think, of Trump to Nixon, who governed during a similarly difficult time in international order in the 1970s, and who was willing to take sort of big steps to fix what at the time I think were perceived as America's strategic oversteps, right? So getting out of Vietnam, getting off the gold standard, that's the Nixon part of it. And I think there is this picture that some folks are painting of Trump as doing that, right? He is trying to effectuate a pivot to China. He's trying to end the war in Ukraine, or at least US involvement, force European allies to pick up their own role, try to pull back from the Middle East, try to rebalance trade in a way favorable to America. And again, I think this is not all that's happening, but one could paint a picture that suggests that this is about strategic recalibration, that this is realpolitik. And I think there's something to it, even if it's not the whole picture.
And what are the flaws in that model? I mean, it doesn't explain, for example, large parts of Middle East policy, right?
Yeah, so Israel, and I'm sure we'll talk more about this as we go through here, but Israel remains one of the exceptions. Donald Trump remains extremely supportive of Israel. He has been willing to lean on the government in Israel, but not to an extent that he's managed to stop that war. He is poised to either potentially make a nuclear deal with Iran or potentially start military strikes on Iran, which would be the exact opposite of that. And then I think the other area where we really have to question this is, again, these tariffs, right? We could see, and indeed there have been people arguing that these tariffs are part of an attempt to bring back US manufacturing, to make our supply chains more secure, to weaken the dollar in a way that might help American exporters. But that's not how the tariffs are being implemented, and that's not how they've been planned. So this does not quite fit with a well thought out strategic approach to the problem.
Right, exactly. And even if you see a realist element to tariffs, part of the problem here is how Trump thinks about trade deficits as necessarily bad, or trade itself as zero sum, and that obviously challenges the model too. The other model, the second model, I should say, that you proposed is this idea that domestic politics and interests are the biggest foreign policy drivers. So basically, foreign policy begins at home, and you cite Doge efforts as evidence of this model. Talk us through that.
Yeah, I mean, so look, this is not a new theory. This, I think, is the model that many in the Democratic Party applied to Trump during his first term, right? We all remember Russiagate. We all remember the notion that Trump is doing certain things in foreign policy because he likes dictators and they owe him money, which, turned out not particularly to be accurate. But that still, as a narrative, persists, particularly again on the Democratic side of the aisle. The idea that the Trump administration is trying to enrich its donors to help them to potentially make them richer. And there are other domestic politics parts of it, right? Immigration, The idea that Trump is trying to bolster his domestic support by, drumming up a campaign against, Mexican cartels and criminals and deporting them to El Salvador, that this is domestic politics. Even JD Vance, right, when he goes out to particularly Europe and he yells at allies for not spending enough on defense, or he's sitting in the Oval Office and he says, Zelensky, you're not showing Trump proper respect. I think all of that we could put a domestic political gloss on, right? That this is playing to an audience at home or trying to help a constituency that has supported Trump in the past.
And then you have a third model, which you're calling a return to the first term. So, in other words, yes, the first 100 days were turbulent, but we might be moving towards some kind of a Trump-Reagan synthesis, Reaganite foreign policy with some of Trump's personal flair. Explain that a bit.
So, I mean, I guess I should caveat this one with I don't think this one is particularly accurate, but I want to include it because I think there are a lot of people that are still arguing it, that still believe it. And when I actually went back and looked, because I was curious, I thought, what did Trump do in his first 100 days last time? And then what we actually find is that most of the big moves that people remember about his foreign policy, most of the things that were most outrageous or most remembered, almost all of that happened after the first 100 days, right? So we're still very early in this administration. And it is possible that, we've had these very radical revolutionary folks in the administration, right? Letting Elon Musk loose on USAID, letting Steve Witkoff loose on all our negotiations, and that over time, particularly if they fail in their efforts, that we'll start to see the Republican old guard creep back in and make this a more steady foreign policy. Folks like Marco Rubio will, come out of their shells and start to take more responsibility, take more of the lead. And again, I'm not particularly persuaded here, but I think there are a lot of people that either believe or hope that this is where we're headed.
And what I like about your essay again is this isn't just about what you're arguing or believing. You're trying to find models to make sense of the Trump administration, the final model, and then we can assess them all. This one looks at infighting within the Republican Party and suggests that, a lot of the chaos we're seeing is because various factions within the party or within Trump world are jostling for, their own pet projects. Explain that.
So I think this is, again, something that we saw at the start of the first term. And as we saw that Republican reversion to the mean in foreign policy terms, we basically saw that Trump was saddled with or left with a selection of advisors who didn't really share his views. This time around, I think Trump is working from a very different place of support, right? He has built a MAGA coalition inside the Republican Party that is more nationalist, protectionist, Jacksonian in they're willing to use force, but they are not necessarily, they're not neoconservatives, right? They don't want to go out and save the world. And so, we see in his appointees that he is bringing people into the administration who would have been unthinkable in previous Republican administrations, people like Tulsi Gabbard, for example, or even JD Vance, right, whose views are, well thought out, but outside the mainstream. And so I think we are still seeing contestation between that group and the classic view of Republican foreign policy. And in particular, we're seeing that contestation a little bit over Ukraine, but particularly over Iran and Israel, I think, where there's still a very strong Republican sentiment on these issues. And the notion that Trump might be able to make a peace deal is not necessarily popular.
Emma Ashford, so great to chat with you. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me. It's going to be an exciting couple of years.
You bet, maybe longer. For anyone who hasn't read Emma's essay, it's up on our site. Do take a look. And on Wednesday on FP Live, I'm going to try and play Emma's role. We have a special Ask Me Anything episode analyzing the first 100 days of the Trump administration. Email us your questions at live@foreignpolicy.com. Just put Ask Me Anything in the subject line, or you can send questions in on our site in the usual place. And remember, you can always listen to this show and past episodes for free on our podcast. That is FP Live, wherever you get your audio. I'm Ravi Agrawal. Thanks for joining.